Anthony Michels from the Netherlands, and today I want to discuss with you a very important subject, namely what is driving the lockdown. And I think a huge piece of the puzzle is being missed really by everybody in the truth community, and it is really completely vital. And I won't say it's immediately missed. Because I think many people out there do realize that that there is something financial going on, and that this is very important, that this is a very major piece of the puzzle. But so what I want to do today with you is just explain what exactly is going on, and how finance and the lockdown interrelate. And after watching this video, you will see that it is entirely driven by finance. And in the first place, just a little bit of context where I'm coming from. This day and age, this era is about the decline and fall of the American empire. This is very important, and to keep in mind. America has been in decline for 40 years, basically since the late 70s, and the rest of the West as well. And this already had to do with rising debt levels in the West. This was causing more and more unearned income, speculation, neoliberalism, more wealth going to the rich, working people and small business, on the defensive. And okay, we see with the migration, with the breakdown of the family and morals in general in the West. And this decline is now coming to a head because America has been the hegemon in the world, of course, since 1945, and these days are over. They have been over for, a while already. I mean, America simply is not as dominant as it was 40 years ago, say. But until now, they held on to this status of a hegemon, because in international politics, these things always lag. The power reality precedes the status and reputation in the world. This is always ongoing. Declining powers always seem big and powerful for longer than they actually were. And this is true of the United States today also. America's hegemony is going to officially end this summer. And America is going to retreat from a large part of the world, especially Europe and the Middle East. And another thing that is ongoing is that the petrodollar is being torched. The petrodollar is also over, because these two things are obviously very intimately linked, the petrodollar and world reserves to currency status of the United States and the US empire. And so this is the context of what is now happening. And America is going to get downgraded. It's not going to be dead immediately, although its process of dying will continue and will accelerate in the years ahead, even though it will seem as if there's going to be a bit of a restoration or whatever, because big things are going to happen this summer. That much is pretty clear. And but America will continue to decline. What we're now going to is the next phase of this decline, where America is no longer the hegemon, but still a great power. And it will retreat from Europe and the Middle East. And their remaining assets, also very much military assets, will be aimed at maintaining control of Asia. Well, control of Asia is a big word, because the obvious next hegemon is China, and that'll be the US enemy for the years ahead. And US-Chinese relations will dominate in the years ahead. They already do, but they will come to a fore. And there is already a Cold War going on with China, and this could well lead to a hot-blooded war in the years ahead. And so this is a bit of geopolitical context where we stand, and what's ongoing, and this is what drives everything really. All the domestic politics in the United States, people are obsessed about this, identity politics, the insanity of the left, BLM, all these things, but really they are complete distractions. And they are, and I will show you this later on also, as we continue. But what's really going on is a planned and controlled takedown of the United States as hegemon, and the banking cartel that always owned the United States and which created the United States, because the United States was created for occult reasons by Freemasons, by world power, and they built it to conquer the world. And now it has done its job. It did its job in 1945, and the US was completely supreme, and therefore the bankers were completely supreme. And the next phase is world government, and we're only 5 to 10 years away from that now. And for this, they have to remove the United States as the last obstacle, the last remaining power with real ambitions of its own, and being used to be the boss. So therefore they must go, and they will go in the years ahead. And now I'll continue. So this is only just a geopolitical context where we're heading. And now I will explain and expose how this relates to the lockdown and what is really going on, the financial crisis. And for this, let me take you back to 2008. And in 2008, in the fall of 2008, during the collapse of Lehman Brothers, which was, the defining disaster of that financial crisis, Hank Paulson, who was the treasurer in those days, went to Congress. And there was a massive financial meltdown ongoing on Wall Street. And he told Congress, and he had a closed doors meeting with them. Nobody was allowed there, but okay, the story came out. But he basically told them, listen, you're going to give us $700 billion, or the whole financial system is going to collapse, and ATMs will stop functioning. People won't be able to transfer money from their bank accounts. Deposits will be gone, and you will have an armed uprising within a week. And that's what he told them, basically. And therefore they gave him the money. Simple as that, because that was bad news, of course. Huh? So Hank Paulson got a $700 billion, and later he explained that he had really no inkling of how much money he was going to need, but he cooked up this $700 billion because it sounded really big, and because he just didn't want to come short in bailing out the banks. So that's how it went, and the banks got bailed out. And while they were bailing out the banks and giving them this $700 billion, but also 16 trillion, of course, in loans, many of which has never come back. The people were getting disowned and were getting thrown out of their houses. And the housing bubble, on which much of the consumer wealth in the United States had been built, suddenly, well, I can't say disappeared, but took a huge hit. And so there was a huge resentment against the bankers, and very rightly so, I might add, because this was just a heist, the heist of the century, basically. What is coming will be even much bigger than that. But it was a big heist, and people knew it, and they took to the streets, and a new movement arose. It was Occupy Wall Street. And it was really humiliating for the powers that be, and also threatening, because there was a lot of good thinking going on in Occupy Wall Street, absolutely good thinking. And okay, it was a mass movement, so there was also a lot of what have you, but it's very easy to criticize Occupy Wall Street, and people also have a tendency of mocking losers, but people are losers because of the system, and it is cruel that poverty and a harsh fate in life is always, blamed on people, whereas the system itself creates masses of losers. In capitalism, only the richest 10% win, the rest lose. So in America, especially after 40 years of neoliberalism, there are a great many losers, and these people suddenly were heard and were sympathized with more at any rate, and people started joining each other in the streets, also here in Holland and the rest of the West. And there was real discontent, and people were really pointing at the rich, which is obviously where all the blame belongs, because it's the rich that are sucking everybody dry with usury and landlordism and speculation, all the unearned income of capitalism. So yeah, they took to the streets, and this was a great embarrassment for the powers that be, and as I said, a threat. And they fixed this in the first place by ongoing bailouts, which did stabilize the economy somewhat. Nothing was solved, and I'll explain you that nothing was solved. But at any rate, an immediate meltdown was prevented. The economy teetered on the brink of collapse, as they say, but it continued, and the media started writing about green shoots and recovery and economic growth, and they started defaming Occupy Wall Street, and this is also quite vital, with you know, it being too wide, and they started competing with the popular resentment that was very specifically aimed at banking and at capitalism and at all the wealth grabbing and stealing by Wall Street, because there's no other word than just blatant outright theft what is going on in Wall Street and what has been going on forever. I mean, this is nothing new, of course. All this usury is mere theft, but so they started competing with that very real resentment and justified resentment with bullshit stories about racism. You can see in 2010, 11, 12, suddenly there is a huge rise in the number of mentions of racism in the media. The media started blathering about nothing else, and this is, of course, we know this. This is always how they operate. Proper real resentment gets usurped, and with the cockamamie story, you know. So instead of everybody being exploited by landlords and bankers, suddenly white wage slaves are privileged, you know. So that's what they did, and it worked basically, because Occupy started disintegrating, and it always works, by the way, because it destroyed all our mass movements. But this is what happened. And how do we know that nothing was solved during this period of 2008 and its aftermath? Because for basically 13 years until this year, the West has known 0% interest rates, and this has nothing to do with economic growth. I mean, if the economy is growing, interest rates historically have always been at 6, 7, 8, 10%. That's when you have economic growth, and this is how central bankers create booms. First low interest rates, and then there is a boom and inflation, and then there is they raise rates, and then they crash the economy with that, and it follows a depression, and next they start inflating again with low interest rates. This is what they have done forever, but during economic growth you have high interest rates, you know, high whatever, 6, 7, 8%, and we had none of that. I mean, in 2017 the Fed created what started. Let me put it this way. So we have never had economic growth since 2008. This is the reality. If you have 0% interest rates, doesn't matter if your economy is up 2% or whatever. The fact is there is no economic growth. There is in fact a massive depression ongoing, and huge monetary stimulus to keep things going. 0% is massive monetary stimulus. That's what it is. And that's what we've had since 2008. And in 2017, the Fed started tapering, and they started trying to, you know, ever so slightly raise interest rates again a little bit, and they brought them up to 2%. And at the time, myself and many other commentators, we saw what was ongoing, and it was completely obvious to everybody that this could only result in one thing, namely a deflationary collapse. And that is immediately what happened in September 2017, 19, I must say, September 2019, 17th of December, September 2019. Suddenly, the banks stopped lending to each other again, just as they had done in 2008, because they didn't trust each other's collateral anymore, because it was all busted, it was all gone. All the derivative bets and what have you, they were gone, and the banks were gone, and the hedge funds were gone, and they didn't trust each other anymore, and they wouldn't lend to each other anymore. And that's what happened in September 2019. And this then is why the Fed restarted quantitative easing in September 2019. And this is what restarted the credit crunch. The crunch was back. And they created it because they started tapering and raising rates. They knew exactly what they were doing because banks, the central bank knows exactly what they're doing. And they created this deflationary shock. And next, this was used as the excuse to restart quantitative easing. And they did two things in quantitative easing. In the first place, they started providing day-to-day loans to the banks on the repo market, because at the end of every day, the banks have to close their books and everything must be in balance, debit and credit. And if it isn't, the bank is busted, broke, bankrupt. And that's why they borrow and lend to each other at the end of the day to help each other fix their books for the day. And since they wouldn't do that anymore, they needed a lender of last resort, and that was the Fed. So that's the first thing that they did, the Fed. That's the first quantitative easing. And the second quantitative easing is that the Federal Reserve started buying up treasuries. In the first place, to create more dollars, because if the government borrows from banks, banks create new money also, but they have to acquire a deposit for every dollar that they lend out. So $1 deposit for every dollar they create and lend out. And this basically sterilizes the real volume of money in the economy. But when the Fed creates new dollars and starts buying up treasuries, they do not acquire deposits from the capital markets. So therefore, the effective money supply, the money that actually circulates in the economy and which is not being used for deposits, 95% or more of money is in deposits nowadays. The real money supply is very small compared to what is in deposits. But the Fed started adding real new dollars to the economy by printing new dollars without acquiring deposits from the international banking system. So that's two ways in which the Fed started quantitative easing. And this was in September 2019 again. And what also started in September 2019? The impeachment. And I'm sure everybody remembers the impeachment. What I was thinking, what everybody was thinking, what's it about? It was a cockamamie story. They had nothing. It was a bullshit story. It should never have happened. The whole charade should never have happened. But Trump and the Democrats were kept busy for 3 months with this, yeah. And well, no, let me put it this way. They kept busy the American people while the Fed started printing money like crazy. Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump and the media started this circus of impeachment. And everybody was obsessed with it at the time. So it worked. Instead of getting angry like that the banks were again being bailed out and getting seriously worried about what the hell is going on, why are they restarting printing money again? People were obsessed about this bullshit impeachment thing going on. So that's what happened in late 2019. And then the first working day of 2020 indeed, January the 3rd, 2020, the Federal Reserve had to report on what they had been up to on the repo market. And their report showed that they had already doled out 6 trillion in day-to-day loans to the banks. 6 trillion. And okay, this money is then loaned out, it was 75 billion a day or so. And that over 3 months, that amounts to something like 6 trillion. And that's what they had been loaning out. And this money, okay, was loaned out on a day-to-day basis, and it was repaid at the end of the day by the banks, or early in the morning by the banks. So it was not that the banks had received 6 trillion for keeps, but the fact that this 6 trillion had been necessary to keep the banks going was a gigantic issue. And this sum, of course, of 6 trillion, yeah, that's a big sum, and could have led to questions. Quite simple, big questions, well-deserved, very big questions, I might add. And so they needed another distraction, and they executed Soleimani. that's what they did. On the day that the Fed had to report that they had already doled out 6 trillion to the bank, Soleimani was killed. And Trump was there in the world threatening to wage war on Iran. There was a firestorm in the media, panic all over the world. Jesus, what's going on now? Are they really going to attack Iran? What the hell is going on? And real concern with people. And obviously, these things are dangerous games. Well, if it isn't complete theater, because everything's theater in this world. But that's what they did, and that too worked like a charm. Nobody noticed that the Fed had doled out 6 trillion in day-to-day loans. So that's how 2020 started. This great year, you know, that we all remember so well. This last year of ours, this disastrous year. And this is what happened. And then 3 months later, things only went much worse on the repo market. The banks started needing more and more money every day. And by mid-March, March 16th, the Fed was already bailing out these banks on a daily basis to the tune of, sit down and hear me out here, 1 trillion per day. That was the situation on March 16th, 2020. And this had nothing to do with whatever was happening in Wuhan or anything. This had been building since September 2019. And these 6 months, they went up from 75 billion per day to 1 trillion per day. And this obviously indicated that the bankruptcy of the banks was only getting worse and worse, and they were losing huge bets. And yeah, what really was going on is that all sorts of debts were being defaulted on, and therefore derivatives were being busted, because all the debt these days is insured with derivatives, and these derivatives were all getting busted, and this is what was destroying the New York banks, because the New York banks are the counterparties in all these derivatives. And okay, they created a bad how do they call this, a bad loans bank in Germany. They turned Deutsche Bank into a basically a death house with all their junk in it. But yeah, it was Wall Street, the Wall Street banks that were really getting busted in the derivative trade. That is what happened in those days, and this is why they needed so much money every day. And so the Fed and the government decided that something had to be done about this trillion per day, and that a more structural solution to the bankruptcy of the big Wall Street banks had to be found. And they decided on a 4 trillion asset purchasing program. Basically 4 trillion, I'm saying here. So basically 6 times the amount of that 700 billion that Hank Paulson got from Congress back in 2008, and which led to this Occupy Wall Street movement, which was such an embarrassment for the powers that be. So they were going to give the bank a massive bailout, and they feared simply a popular uprising and huge social unrest as a result of this. And perhaps rightly so. I mean, these people know us, and they've controlled us for a long time. They know how we think, and they know exactly yeah, what the spirit in society is. So I'm betting they were right about all this. And they decided to lock down. So in the weekend of March 16, 2020, they first gave out the bank. They gave the bank a bailout of 4 trillion. Excuse me, 4 trillion. And to prevent social unrest, they created this Wuhan virus story. They didn't create the virus; they created the story, and they whipped up this theater in Wuhan, because with hindsight we know it was all theater, and that it was created by Fauci and WHO, the WHO, Bill Gates and his buddies at Gavi, these were the people who, and of course the Rockefeller Foundation, let's not forget the Rockefeller Foundation, they created this this lockdown, and the WHO is obviously the health ministry of the world government, and all the countries in the world are signatories to the WHO, and the WHO has the power and the authority to decide what's a pandemic. And next they created this this funny business in Wuhan, and because China has a you know, a ruthless dictatorship as a government, they immediately started all sorts of brazen, idiotic lockdown maneuvers, which were then shown to be effective, because in no time COVID, wink wink, it was over in Wuhan, but the Western governments here decided, oh yeah, we need now also, we also need these lockdowns because they work in China. And that's how we got saddled with, you know, this this lockdown tribe. And of course, you know, I mean, it's even worse because all these Western states have been preparing for for this event for a long time. And I'm not talking about the lockdown. Okay, they've been preparing for that, but for the fact that the debt bubble is now at its max and that it can no longer grow, because that is the fundamental reason for the financial crisis that started in 2019. But I'm not going to do too deeply into that now. I mean, you can read it on an article. I'll leave some links here below. But that's what's underlying the real financial issues in the United States and the West. And they locked down, and what they did was they gutted the First Amendment, the right to assemble, to free assembly, and in the United States for a year nobody could get together. Nobody wanted to either, because of course they were afraid of the virus. And in Europe nowadays, even today nowadays, all social gatherings, most social gatherings in Europe are still verboten, quite simple. And obviously the right to free assembly is absolutely fundamental to any free people and to any democracy, but that's all of the distant past now. We're now in the brave new world, and this is why they did it, because they were bailing out the banks to the tune of trillions and trillions and trillions, and they're still doing it behind the scenes also in Europe. This is hardly talked about in Europe at all, but behind the scenes huge amounts of money have been doled out to Deutsche Bank, you know, which has been gutted and enslaved by Wall Street banks, they have kept the sudden death crisis going by endless guarantees from the north. And when I talk about the sudden debt crisis, Italy, Spain, these countries, Greece, I'm not talking about the bankruptcy of these governments. I mean, that could easily be solved, you know, just let them go bankrupt and write off debt. I mean, it's not brain surgery, but the problem is, of course, that it's not states that are in charge; it's the banks that are in charge, and the banks won't allow a debt write-off, and they have insisted on repayment in full. And this is to a large extent, by the way, because the Wall Street banks have been demanding this, because they, as discussed, via the derivative scam, are on the hook, are the counterparties to all derivatives worldwide. So if the derivatives fail, ultimately, if the debts fail, which have been insured via derivatives, then ultimately these Wall Street banks are on the hook for them. That's what's going on behind the scenes. And this has made them very profitable when things were going well. But now that the debt bubble is at its max, and the West will be forced into a deleveraging in the years ahead, all these defaults that are ongoing and which are already happening behind the scenes are now going south, and the rest is history. And this then is what is going on, and this is why they locked down, because they wanted to prevent social unrest, and the lockdown is going to continue in the years ahead, especially in Europe, which has been especially hard hit by the debts, because as described, we've been a colony of Wall Street in the United States, and this is what happened. And in the United States, they're going to be a little more free, but yeah, the destruction of the debt bubble in the United States is going to absolutely totally destroy the country, and there will be very little left of the place when this greatest depression, which is now coming, will have run its course, and especially if not if there's going to be war between them and China, which is quite likely. And not immediately, but 5, 6, 7 years along the road. And as a final note, two things. In the first place, a little more about this debt bubble situation. Since the war, debt has been rising at the rate of compound interest, basically. Money in the West has been growing with about 5, 6, 7, 8% per year on average. Say 8% per year on average. And yeah, this is 8% per year, looks like this, huh? It's just like the debt. I mean, if money grows, the debt grows, and this is why debt has been growing over the last decades. And this debt had already been becoming, as is discussed, unsustainable in the late 70s. That's when more rationalizations were necessary to keep the debt growing, and therefore incomes of working people had to be slashed so that more interest on more debt could be paid. And this now has been going on for so long, and the debt is now so vast, and interest rates have been forced to be at zero and maybe even lower in the near future because things are so deflationary that it can no longer be sustained. It must stop. We understand well, we're in this situation. This is where we're at, and we simply cannot take on any more debt. You see it in the Biden budget. It has a deficit of 1.8 trillion, 1.8 trillion, whereas US debt is already 29 trillion, and which is about 130% of GDP, which is simply unsustainable. And if you have almost 10% deficit and well, okay, so maybe 7% deficit and 130% debt of 130% GDP, yeah, that's simply unsustainable. And international finance, but also competing powers will simply not accept this, especially if you're just printing money like crazy, as the Fed has been doing, and not when you want to pretend that you're the hegemon and that you want to pretend that you're running the world reserve currency. That's simply not going to work out, and it is not working out, and it is going to be stopped this summer. And they're going to stop it, and they're going to force the leveraging with the coming gold standard. That's what they're going to do. And for years, in the alternative media and in the patriot movement, Austrian economics, people like Ron Paul and the Mises Foundation, they have been promoting this coming gold standard. But what patriots must understand is that it is going to be used to create a disastrous deleveraging. And this is going to be not inflationary, because bankers always sell their gold with inflation. We fear inflation so much, we need gold, and inflation is theft. But deflation is apparently not theft, and usury is also not theft. But gold is going to bring a terrible deflation in the United States and in the entire West, and it's going to be absolutely, completely disastrous. Not immediately. When they put the gold standard in place, they will give it a little bit of air, you know, so that the economy will manage for 6 months or maybe a year. But then the relentless deflation of the gold standard will start hitting, and the economy will start getting ripped apart, because what we're going to see is hyper deflation in the United States and elsewhere. And in the United States, there are also other pressures, but the fact of the matter is this deflation of the debt bubble that is going to that they are going to force. That is, money is debt, so if the debt is being repaid, there's going to be less and less and less money in circulation, and that is the essence of deflation. And deflation is the cause of depression. The Great Depression was caused by the deflation that the Federal Reserve caused as of 1929. Everything was on austerity, austerity, austerity. As a result, less and less and less money in circulation. And by 1933, 2/3 of the US money supply had been taken out of circulation. And it was a complete disaster. And it's going to be worse this time. Much worse. Very much worse. Because remember, the West must die before they can have their world government. And they're going to do it with the greatest depression and ultimately, very likely, with war against China. That's the scenario. And the common gold standard is nothing good. It's nothing, it's going to solve nothing. It is not intended to solve anything. Gold throughout history has always been owned by the money power, has always been owned by this clique that is behind the New World Order. All the gold standards of the past, the Bank of England, the Fed, the Amsterdam's Wisselbank, the central bank in the Amsterdam Empire, were always gold-based. Venice, which controlled gold and silver. This has always been their, it has always been their money, gold. Gold is the banker money. This is why JP Morgan left this famous quote. Gold is money, all the rest is credit, is what he said. But that's a banker talking to you. That's not the truth. That's a banker talking to you. And then people believe this, but no, gold is not money. Gold, you know, gold is suited for to hoard with. It's so-called wealth. You can use it to save, but gold is a lousy means of exchange, and it does not circulate because everybody sits on it. Everybody hoards it, and it does not circulate in the real economy. For real money as a means of exchange, so not a store of value, but a means of exchange, must circulate well, and only interest-free money can really circulate well in the economy without being hoarded, without being sucked off with usury, and without inflations and deflations, which is what these bankers are constantly causing. Yeah, my apologies for the sunlight. I'm getting a little bit disturbed. This is what you would see otherwise. That's why I'm leaning to the side. But yeah, that's just the way it is now for this time of the evening. But this is the situation that we're facing. The common gold standard is going to be completely disastrous. And this has been the banker plan always. At my website, Real Currencies, we've been discussing this issue for 10 years. 10 years ago, we were predicting that the gold standard was going to come and that was going to create the greatest depression. And that is what is going to happen this summer, because this summer it's all going to go down. In June, late June, 2 weeks from now, Basel III is going to be installed. And one of the implications of Basel III is that gold suppression by the Fed is going to end. And the Fed is over. The Fed has, you know, as the ruler of the world, the financial world with the petrodollar. In that sense, the Fed is over. And likely, my expectation is that when there's going to be a crash, because there's going to be a crash this summer, which will be used to implement the new system. That's what they're going to use the crash for. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Fed is just going to be disbanded. I wouldn't be surprised, but because they will get the blame for everything. And then they will solve the Fed with a gold standard, or maybe they will have the Fed run the gold standard in the United States. I don't know. I don't care. It's immaterial too, because it doesn't matter what vehicle they have, what vehicle they use. They create a vehicle and they kill a vehicle if there is too much popular resentment to it. That they don't care about that as long as they control the next vehicle, and they will control the next vehicle because they control all the gold. They own all the gold. And what is also important to note is that the new gold standard is going to be a massive, 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 massive wealth transfer from those not having gold to those who have gold. You know, they have the gold. Very few people in the United States and Europe have gold. People in China have gold. The banks have most of the gold, but many people in China have gold, and especially the Chinese central bank has a lot of gold. They have about 20 to 30,000 undeclared gold deposits. So 20 to 30,000 tons. So that's 3 to 4 times what Fort Knox is said to have, 8,000 tons, and what the Europeans are said to have, which is also 8,000 tons. So China is going to be, yeah, incredibly powerful in the years ahead. And What we're also going to see is that the dollar is going to lose at least half of its value in the years ahead, and probably more beyond, but within now and a few years it will be only half. And what this will lead to is that suddenly, and I mean this vis-a-vis not even so much the euro, because it will probably decline as well, but especially the yuan. And the yuan will double in real terms towards the dollar, and that will mean that suddenly the Chinese will have a GDP of 40, 50 trillion US dollars, and the United States will have only 25 trillion dollars, which is also bogus. I mean, most of it is financial funny stuff, which produces and adds nothing. It's only the rich taking in their plunder. There's no real production there. China has a far more productive economy at the moment than the United States. It wasn't always like this, but it is today. And this is what we will see. Simply because the yuan appreciates and the dollar declines, this will mean that in nominal terms, China will suddenly be, will prove to be twice as big as the United States within a few years. So keep that in mind. That's where we're going. And you can think of what this means geopolitically, yeah? Also very much for the United States, but also very much for Europe, which is looking very weak compared to Russia and China, especially without American protection, which is going to be the case in the years ahead, because America is going to retreat from Europe, as said. Okay, so the sun's becoming very harassing, so I'm going to leave it at this, and I think we have discussed most. It's a lot to take in, but this is the deal, and this is what is going to happen, and things are going to happen in the months ahead, and likely Trump is going to come back. You hear these stories, maybe not, but Trump is on their team. Forget about him. He's their man to take down America. That's the name of the game, and he will tell you that the gold standard is good and that it will solve everything, but it will destroy America. It will destroy the West. Not even because it's gold, but also very much because the deleveraging that it's going to force. It's going to be the deflation and depression. Okay. Yeah, not good news, but I hope you will weigh my words very carefully. And also, I hope that people have now a better grasp of what is really going on with the lockdown, because people are obsessed still with this virus. They have very fuzzy ideas about what is to come and what is really driving it. But the restart of QE4 in September 2019 and the $4 trillion bailout that they gave the bank in the same weekend that they locked us up, 4 billion of us, that lockdown was created to lock us up to prevent resistance. And in the years ahead, they will do it again. Good night.